Gracious Father in heaven, we thank you for this day and for all the many, many blessings you've bestowed on each and every one of us. Thank you for this opportunity that we have to come together and study a portion of your word. Thank you for Kevin and all the work he puts in to get these lessons prepared so that they can mean the most to each one of us. Pray that you'd be with us, help us, forgive us when we sin. We pray in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. Yes, we are going to continue on today in the book of Acts. And so we're going to be in chapter 17. If you got a Bible, we're going to be hanging out in Acts 17 in the city of Athens. But to begin with, I do want to come back to where we started last week. We started a new heart verse, if you happen to be absent last week. We've begun, again, memorizing Scripture. We're trying to put God's Word into our heart because we want to be able to have it to serve as we engage different aspects of life. This is a different type of heart verse than we've done before. This is more of you trying to get it into your heart to use to pray back to God. So this is, as you mentioned, this is just a snippet. It's a small part of a larger prayer that Paul prays, just as a practice to start pulling into our own prayers. I pray that out of his glorious riches, he may strengthen you with power through the Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And really, I cut it off in the middle of a sentence, so it really should go on. But for space's sake, I decided to cut it to this little bit. So this is our new heart verse. It's out of Ephesians chapter 3, verses 16 and 17. So Ephesians chapter 3, verse 16 and 17. As I mentioned last week, there are other Pauline prayers that are really good. I encourage you to put them into your heart as well and let them serve you as you pray to God. They've been a blessing for me along the way. So anyway, with that in mind, we'll see how we're doing so far. All right? Yes, Wes. Pauline, yes, belonging to Paul. Pauline, Pauline. So, good question. I'm sorry, I threw it. If there's ever any words I say that come out of my mouth that don't make sense, please stop me, because I may be just going off the rails. Yes, Pauline is the idea of anything, Pauline letters means letters by Paul. So it's just an adjective of Paul. Thanks, good question. All right, so let's say this one together, and we'll just, since we're learning it, we're going to start with what's on the screen, so we can just repeat it together. All right, ready? I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. All right. So I want to encourage you to keep working on this one, and let's get this into our heart, because I think we need to be able to pray this one. I think this is a helpful prayer for us day in, day out. All right. And if you need a thing, you can take a photo of that if you're working on it yourself. That's a good way, again, to learn it, to put the first letter, and that kind of gets you rolling downhill, so it always helps me. Okay, last few weeks we've been hanging out in the Lycus Valley and looking at specifically the household codes. We've spent some extended time there chatting about what it means to be husband-wife, and we also looked at the story of one Onesimus, right, in the book of Philemon. So we've talked about different aspects of what it looks like in the first century, how Paul pushed back on the status quo of what it meant to be husband, wife, dad, husband and master, and all those different relationships. And Paul was pushing towards love at the heart of it, treating other with respect and dignity, and he was changing the culture which he was in, pushing more. And hopefully we've grown in some areas. I've been challenged as I've looked at these passages the last few weeks. I hope they've been helpful to you as well. And we want to see, is Christ really our paterfamilias for my family now? Am I putting him as the center? Is he really the Lord in every aspect of how I treat my spouse, how I treat my kids, how am I relating with others? That's what we've been looking at. So with that in mind, we're going to shift gears today to a new location. Like I said, we're going to be going to the city of Athens. All right, so Athens, I'm going to look at some introductory stuff, but as always, I want to give you information to dig deeper. We're just barely scratching the surface on so much. So if you want to dig deeper, here are some good resources. The bottom three are just commentaries. We'll start with those really fast. The first one there by Craig Keener, it's like I looked it up last night. It's 4,400 pages of just exegetical meat. It is solid as could be. If you want to dive deep, that's where you should go. Okay, I mean, it's like four volumes. It's just ginormous. That's probably not your go-to. I think it's like $250 or something. So you probably are not one to invest $250 in a book. The others are more attainable. John Stott, if you're not familiar with John Stott, he was a great theologian, does some really great work on a number of different areas. He's got some really good things to say usually, and he's got a commentary on Acts. And also, Paul Hill is another author that I've found to be helpful. Specifically, if you're looking for a good set of commentaries more broadly, the New American, this one's mentioned here, the New American Commentary series, those are pretty good. Those are pretty solid. So if you're looking for just different ideas, those are some good places to start. There's so many commentaries out there. There's much more than I could ever put on the screen. But these are ones that I've personally found helpful. There's one by Barrett that's another one that's pretty good. But there's lots more out there. All right, I'm going to go look at the first two because they're very different. They're not Acts commentaries. They're not related to Acts directly. They're looking at other aspects. The first one I want to look at is the one by Carmen Imes. We, in our life group, in fact, read this book by Carmen Imes called Being God's Image. It's a fantastic book based upon the passage there in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 and 27, that's talking about we have been made in God's image. And she develops that and explains what the importance of that is. And we're going to see how that comes into play as we navigate engaging people in our world, because I think that is a foundational concept that we need to really put into our hearts. So, being God's image, excuse me. She has one called Bearing God's Name, so I may get those two mixed up. Being God's Image, Why Creation Still Matters, there by Carmen Imes, and the other one, this first one, here's another really interesting. Randy Newman wrote a book back in 2004 called Questioning Evangelism. He's not doubting we need to be doing it. All right? It's a methodology of using conversation, using questions in our process of evangelizing and telling other people the good news. And look, because if you look at the story of Jesus, how many times did people ask him a question and how did he respond? Yes, with a question. And that's a good way to dialogue with people. Say, well, what do you think about that? And I think there's so much we can gain from this method. We're going to come back to Newman later on in the lesson, but I think these are both really good resources that are worth looking into. So I think I've got Randy's book up here if you want to take a look at it in a minute or after class or something. Good works. Here's some digger stuff. Be able to dig deeper if you'd like. All right. Well, let's start with this very important question. All right. Where in the world is Athens? This one we know, right? What country is it in? Greece. Hey, all right, we have it. Modern day Greece. So it is in Europe, and it's part of the country that we call Greece today. If we want to see around Athens, we find out that it's there located in the red circle. So we have the area here. This is going to be modern Greece today. Here's modern day Turkey. And so we are going to be hanging out here in this part of the world. Here's a little bit closer thing. And you'll see the proximity to the city of Corinth. Corinth is just down the road. I can't remember how many miles. It's not very far. You can drive it there in about half an hour or something. So it's not far from Athens. So Corinth and Athens are near to each other. And you can see this is part of Paul's second missionary journey. And that's where the line's going there. So Paul had left up here. He'd visited Philippi, gone to Thessalonica, hit Berea, and then has come down here. And we're going to find that he left Berea at night and was kind of having to run out of town as he was in Thessalonica too. But he takes a ship and lands in Athens. And so we're going to be finding him landing his ship at the port and then going into Athens, and we're going to be seeing what he has to do there. So just kind of give you an idea of the city of Athens. I don't know how much you guys care about maps. I'm a map guy. I like geography stuff. That just kind of feeds my soul. So thank you for letting me look at maps with you this morning and boring you to tears. But it helps me to see where things are at because geography does matter sometimes. The most important thing, obviously, is this thing here, right? The Acropolis, right? And we'll talk about that. And on top of the Acropolis, you have a whole bunch of temples, including one, what? What's on top of the Acropolis? We have an altar to the unknown God, perhaps. We also have the Parthenon. There's an Erechtheion and some other things, too. There's a whole bunch of temples, but the most famous is the Parthenon, right? You have here this thing called the Areopagus. The Areopagus is a small little hill that's just to the side of the Acropolis. And that's what we're going to be looking at, Lord willing, next Sunday when Paul hangs out and chats with some folks on the Areopagus. This little place here, this little box here, the Agora, we've talked about agoras before. That's just the center of town. That's where everything happens. That's like the downtown, essentially. And then some other temples and so forth and gates. So that's a quick look at the city of Athens and the core of it. There were some other things that are very important here. I hope we have time to talk about this down the road. This little thing here, the Theater of Dionysius, this is where everything began for Disney. This is where everything began for Hollywood, is on that place. That stage is the first theater in the world. And so we may come back to the impact of that in our world. We'll see a first time or something, I don't know. But important place. So, and then there's all kinds of stuff but I think that gets us there. All right. So, again, geography matters. History matters. It helps us get a bearing about what's going on. I don't want to belabor the history of Athens, but it helps us to see kind of where things are at. To get our brain fixed as we look at Acts in the first century, it's good to know what's really going on there. So, we have evidence of people living in the city of Athens back over 1000 BC. And they had some interesting stories as they developed mythologically. It had its beginnings in myth and things. And there's this interesting myth between Athena, the goddess Athena, who is the goddess of wisdom, and the god Poseidon. They were both kind of trying to fight for who gets to have Athens, as their patron god or goddess. And so they have this thing and they have this contest. And essentially, this is up on the Acropolis. This is the Erechtheion. It's not as well known amongst most people. Most people know the Parthenon, but Erechtheion actually was a really important temple there on the Acropolis. And if you can see there's a tree. Well, this is the olive tree that supposedly was given to them by Athena back, in mythical times. And because she gave them this tree, they said, hey, you're going to, we use the olive oils to eat, or to use in our fires and so forth, as well as to eat and all kinds of other stuff. So the olive was very important in ancient Athens. So they said, hey, Athena, you're our goddess. You're going to be our patron goddess. So there's some other stuff with that, but that's kind of how Athens became connected with the goddess Athena, the goddess of wisdom. And so we're going to come back to her in a moment. So going back early was that. All right, if you know anything about history of Athens, most people think about Athens in its pinnacle, its climax in the 5th century BC. Okay, so the golden age of Athens was 5th century BC. That's the 400s BC. That's when people like Plato, Socrates were hanging out, talking all day, right, being good philosophers. And you also have people like the playwrights. Like I said a minute ago, the idea of theater began in Athens in the 5th century BC. And you have people like Aeschylus, Euripides, Sophocles, Aristophanes, and others as well. But those are the big three tragedians and so forth. So these are big people, big names. Politicians, Cleisthenes, Pericles. May have heard of Pericles there, Themistocles. If you lived there, you had to have your name ended with a "ease," right? So that's just how it worked. So also, a lot of buildings were built in this 5th century, in particularly on the Acropolis. So like our Parthenon was built in the 5th century BC. So it's really old. So we're looking at 2,500 years ago that this was built. And several other buildings were there on the Acropolis and the area. This area, this time period really began with the defeat of the Persians. So there was this big war between the Greeks and the Persians. There's some really great stories there that we'll avoid today. But long story short is after the Greeks beat them, that Athens kind of took the lead of all the Greek city-states, and they kind of were ruling the roost for this area. So they were in this thing called the Delian League, and they basically coordinated with a whole bunch of other city-states, but they were the ones that controlled the things. And so they got all the money. And so they were able to build all of their temples because all the other city-states were paying them tribute. And so that's how they could build all these expensive and wonderful buildings. And that was at the peak and pinnacle of their time. Things were just going and blowing in Athens. They were having time to do philosophy and go to the theater and all this stuff. That's 5th century BC. That is not 1st century BC, or 1st century AD. Okay, it's a different world. So that's where it was in the 5th century. And along comes in the 300s, 338, there was a battle in which this group of upstarts further up in Greece called the Macedonians with this guy named Philip the Macedon, who had a son named Alexander that you may have heard of. They came in and conquered Athens and pulled it into their very fast-growing kingdom. And we know later on that Alexander went off and conquered the world in about 10 years, which is just an amazing thing. Whole nother conversation. Alexander was an incredible general. And so they first started conquering Greece, and then they took over all of the things all the way over to Persia, so all the way over to India. It's amazing. So for many years, for about 200 years, Athens was under the control of the Macedonians, so just part of the Macedonian Empire. And that happened until 146, whenever the big bad Romans came in from Italy. And the Romans came in and conquered, really 146 is kind of the year that the Romans took over most of what we would call Greece today. There's a number of, they kind of fell in different amounts, but generally the Romans conquered Greece in about 148 BC. And so whenever we find Paul going to Athens, it's under Roman rule, okay? So it's under Roman rule. And I love this quote from Horace. He was an important poet under the time of Augustus in the end of the first century BC, right before, the change of Jesus' birth. But he says the Romans admired Greek culture and helped preserve many of Athens' classical traditions. In fact, during the reign of Augustus, Horace declared, captive Greece captured her savage conquerors. What is he saying with that? He's kind of saying, look, the Romans looked at the Athenians and the Greeks like, these guys have culture. We need to learn from them. And they stole so much of the Greek culture. That's where we have the two gods that are basically the same. They just pulled it straight from Greco world. And so much of the culture, the philosophies, all that came over from Greece. So much so that even though technically the Romans conquered the Greeks really implanted all of their culture in Rome in many ways. And so this is the world in which we currently live when we're talking with Paul in Athens. In this time period, also, Athens is not really a big town. It didn't really have any pull. It's called a free city, a civitas libera in Latin. And this was just a number of different cities were this. They weren't, he wasn't the capital of the province even. Corinth actually was the capital of the province of Achaia. So it wasn't the main city in the region even. It was relatively small. The best way I've thought about trying to describe Athens in the first century is if you think about like a college town, that's kind of the feel that I have. Let's say, again, a rough idea. For those of y'all that, like many of us here, have people in Lubbock, that's how I feel about Athens in some ways. It's a college town or college station. Places where it's basically there's nothing else but college that runs the place. That's kind of the feel because a number of of the aristocracy in Rome would send their kids over to Athens to be educated. They would spend a couple of years there and learn and grow and so forth. And so that was a place in which people would go to learn. But it held no power. It was not the 5th century BC golden age. It was a pretty small little town. They had, they had stuff. But even they were being encroached by a couple of other major cities in the ancient Roman world. One being Alexandria. Alexandria in Egypt really had taken the lead as a location for learning. Because they had what? What was in Alexandria? The library, right? This famous library of Alexandria. As well as in a town called Pergamum in what's today Turkey. Those two cities also were kind of focal points of learning in the first century. And so Athens was still an important city. They were still looked at as very cultured. But it wasn't a really popular place as it was back in the 5th century. So I know for me that was kind of a shift in my brain about how I viewed Athens. So this is where we have Paul currently when we get in the 1st century. All right, that's a lot of history. Hopefully that's not too boring. Questions, comments, concerns about that? Yes, Jeff. And if you have other questions, please let me know, y'all, as we walk around. Here you go.
On the screen, that they keep the money.
They were at some times, yes. So they were keeping some of the money from other people for part of the time. You're right.
And stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. And that's how they became pretty rich for a time.
And that's how come they came pretty rich
Yes, sir.
at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm giving it to you.
All right.
Kevin Montgomery.
Thank you, sir. Other questions or comments about this so far? Does that make sense? Everybody tracking? All right. Again, I know this is not getting us anywhere spiritually, but it helps us to kind of get a place where we start looking at things. So part of what we're talking about today is getting our context and getting our brain saying, Athens is not the 5th century Athens of Socrates and Plato. It's just not. It's a very small place. Education is a focal point, but it's not a big place. So that's where Paul is. So again, another thing we like to talk about is not only historical context, but the literary context. We're going to be looking in Acts 17 and what is the literary context? What's going on? Well, as we've said before, Paul left Antioch and started traveling what's called the second missionary journey. He leaves there in the far right part of the screen. You're actually from Jerusalem originally, but he goes back through Antioch, and then he travels across all of Turkey and hits, like I said earlier, Philippi, Thessalonica, Berea, and then he comes down here to Athens. So this is what's going on in Paul's life right now. If you imagine him and he's with a guy named Silas that left with him in chapter 16, and another guy named Timothy that he picked up in Acts 16 as well. And there's others probably there on their traveling group, but those are the two that are often named. So we have Silas, Paul, and Timothy traveling together. Y'all know your Bibles. I think we've talked about this before. Acts 17 at the very beginning. He goes to the city of Thessalonica. How did things go in Thessalonica? Not good, right? Now let's take a step back. What about back in chapter 16 when he goes to the city of Philippi? How did things go in Philippi? Not good, right? He was beaten in Philippi, imprisoned in Philippi for a day or so, let out, and then he had to basically leave town after that. He goes to Thessalonica. After a few short weeks, it seems, he runs in problems with the Jews, and they basically run him out of town, and he's not even allowed to go back. They had to had to pay a fine. Jason had to pay a fine, and probably saying Paul cannot go back into town. So then they kind of sneak off and go to this town called Berea, right? And in Berea, things are going great. We all love the Bereans, right? They were good people. They studied the scriptures and were like, wow, this is really good stuff. Paul's teaching the truth. And they started coming to Christians. Then what happens? People from Thessalonica go over and say, hey, don't you know this Paul guy's trouble? And what's happening with Paul again? Takes off at night and has to leave. Okay, you've been run out of 3 different towns, and this is where Paul is at. Those are some rough turns, aren't they? He's had some hard goes the last little bit. Something else we know from the book of 1 Thessalonians that Paul apparently goes by himself to the city of Athens. So he is not with his traveling companions. There may be somebody with him. He may not be totally alone, but generally he has left both other co-workers up in Berea to finish the work that's up there. And they left a little bit later. And we come to find out, if you look in 1 Thessalonians chapter 3, that somewhere along the way, Silas and Timothy catch up with Paul, and they'll go to Corinth, and that's whenever Paul is actually going to write the book of 1 Thessalonians. So in this moment here in chapter 17, somewhere between Acts 17, 18, that vicinity, when Paul is either in Athens or in Corinth, he's writing the book of 1 Thessalonians. Because he's going to send Timothy back to Thessalonica to say, hey, how you guys doing? Y'all surviving? Because y'all had some hard stuff. So that's what's kind of going on textually. So let's read the book. Let's read, if you got a Bible. Can I have somebody who wouldn't mind reading? Yes.
Question.
Yes.
He was run out of town by the Jews,
He was run out of town by the Jews.
not by the Greeks.
Not by the Greeks. That is correct.
They couldn't really touch him because he was Roman.
They couldn't touch him because, that's a good question. They could possibly get the Romans on board, but, and what we see, he had citizenship, right, and that's what's,
Rights
That's exactly right. In many cases, that's exactly right. There's some questions about some. There's complexities with that, but that's generally actually very right, Wes. That's exactly right. There's always, oh yeah. So, all right. Would somebody mind reading this for me? Just this chunk. It's not very long. Anybody? Okay. Thanks, Wes.
While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Then they took him and brought him to a meeting of Areopagus, where they said to him, "May we know what this new teaching is that you're presenting? You are bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we would like to know what they mean." All the Athenians and foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas.
All right, thank you. It's an interesting little side comment there by Luke, isn't it? About the Athenians. Yeah, they just sit around talking all day. It's a nice little jab. Yeah, like 24-hour news. Yeah, that's the truth of that. So we have here Paul's story in Athens. He shows up, and he does his normal thing. And if you look at the whole book of Acts, you find out this is his M.O. Paul's M.O. is he goes first to where? The synagogue, that's right. He goes to the synagogue and starts talking about with the Bible with them. And as that doesn't go well, or possibly simultaneously too, he goes to the non-Jews, the Gentiles. And does the same thing here. Paul has not changed his M.O. He's still practicing. He's still trying to tell people about Jesus. He starts with his fellow Jews and then goes on to talk with the non-Jews. In this case, he runs into a couple of philosophers, or groups of philosophers, the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers. We're going to talk about them in a moment. But these are kind of this is like ivory tower stuff, okay? These are kind of ivory tower kind of people. And they go, who is this dude? They call him a seed packer, a seed pecker. It's kind of a weird word in Greek. But he just picks up little bits here and there, and then he starts spewing it out of his mouth. That's the idea of this babbler. That's translated babbler. It's kind of a funny word. But that was a very derisive term against Paul. It's like, who's this idiot? Who do you think you are? You're not a real philosopher like us. That's the sense. And they say, well, let's take you up here to the Areopagus. And we'll talk about the Areopagus next week or the following week. We'll see how much time comes up. But this was kind of like their court. It was the court primarily for Athens. But it was also a place probably where they were kind of checking out like their board of education, if you can look at it that way. Kind of like the board of education saying, what is this guy teaching? Is this legit stuff? So that's what we're going to look at next week. I want to focus today on the first chunk there. And let's talk about what Paul did. In this first little bit, he says something very interesting. Paul walks into Athens, and how does it describe his heart? Distressed, right? On different is there another translation that you guys have out there? Say it really loud. What does it yours say about it? Spirit was provoked. Okay. What else? Is there other words that come up with that? He was really ticked, in other words, okay? He was angry. This is a really hard word. And so this is an idea that Paul was really disturbed. At what? What's the reason for him being disturbed? Idols. Isn't that interesting? So, as we think about this, I want us to see that from the moment Paul arrived, he was bumping into idols. Yes? You have a comment?
Just speculation.
Okay, go ahead.
Every place Paul went was full of idols. So was this worse?
Yes, we're going to get there. It's exactly that. So is this worse than everywhere else he was going to? And we're going to find out yes. There was something about Athens that was particularly strong. So Paul is really bothered by what he's seeing. And it's because from the moment he steps off the ship, all through town, all the way in is going to be just one after the other.
Isn't that what you, at least for me, when I think of Athens, that's pretty much what I think of. I mean, all their Greek mythology and all their statues and their people and their this one and that and Athena and all the,
Yeah.
that's all it is. It's the whole creation is that.
When you think about Athens, yes, it seems like that is what comes to our mind is all these different temples and all these things. There's some good reason for that. When Paul arrived, he arrived in the port of Piraeus. That's going to be on the west side, and that would have been, he would come in. Look at these couple of questions here. Whoever approached Athens from afar, a pagan orator opined, would be awed by the glorious sight of the Acropolis. So you get off the boat and you look up there and you're going to be able to see the Acropolis clearly. And beyond that, there's a big, ginormous statue of Athena standing outside with gold and different things. So that's going to be brilliant in the sun. The moment you get off the boat, you're already seeing it. And then, at the second point there, as Paul marched up what's called the Dromos was a big road that came from the port downtown. So this is the way that everybody was flowing. It's the downtown road that has all the potholes, just like over here at the Hobby, right? It's how everybody gets to town. And all along the way, there are going to be, because it's the edge of town, there's going to be cemeteries, but there's going to be memorials to a number of different heroes and mortals that in some sense have become heroes and therefore kind of like demigods, as well as one after the other shrine to different deities as you're walking into town. So you see the Acropolis, you start walking in town, you have all these different things. And as you get closer, you'll find more and more temples. That's exactly what you're saying. It isn't like overboard kind of stuff. If you look on the top, and this is just a quick summary, you start having one temple after the other. Whether it's Poseidon, the one for Zeus, Athena, Erechtheion. There's a really great quote by a 2nd century AD geography writer named Pausanias. He says, and they were conspicuous, talking about the Athenians, not only for their humanity, but also for their devotion to religion. They have an altar to shamefastness. I've never used that word before in my life. I have no idea who translated this. One to rumor and one to effort. It is quite obvious that those who excel in piety are correspondingly rewarded by good fortune. Talking about the Athenians, these guys really went overboard. Like, not only do they have the normal pantheon of Zeus and Athena and all that, but they've got a whole bunch of other things like what we would call qualities, as he describes here, of rumor or effort as deities. And so they would look at these qualities and deify them, essentially, and then have an altar towards effort, for example. And another offer here towards mercy. And there was all kinds of this all over the place. And if you start looking all over town, you've got one of the things that really is remarkable. At practically every corner, you have what's called a herm, H-E-R-M, a herm. It's based upon the god Hermes, and it would have been his head and a pillar and his genitals. That's all it would have been on the thing. Every single corner. Do you think that would rub Paul wrong? And you start getting the idea why Paul was so irritated. It's like everywhere you turn, you can't escape this stuff. Think about a Jew. The Jews we know from the first century had been deeply, deeply impacted by what took place with the fall of Jerusalem in 586 BC. If we know the story of the Jews before the time of the Babylonian captivity, they were involved in idolatry. And that was, if you look at the prophets, one of the key reasons that they were taken off into Babylonian captivity. That was a big deal, if you could imagine. And so they were like, we are never, ever doing idolatry ever again. It does not end well. And if you look at the writings post-Babylon, it is really strong against idolatry. Like, we're not going to go that route again. That was horrible. And this was the mindset of every Jew, or, again, across the board about Jews. And so we find that they were very much against idolatry. So anytime you talk to Jews about the Gentiles, the biggest thing is, hey, you guys are messing with idols. You got to stop that. So this would have been a huge thing for a Jewish person to be bumped into all this stuff all over town. This is what Paul would have seen.
Kevin,
Yes.
just you're looking down from the Acropolis at this other temple.
Uh-huh.
It hasn't changed much because look at the big church in behind it.
It's interesting, yeah.
And it's like that everywhere.
The thing that we see most about the deities there is this probably the most well-known, right? The Parthenon. And so again, talking about our terms really fast, I know we get this, it gets really confusing. The place up here, the whole little mountain is the Acropolis. The Acropolis just means the highest part of the city. So you have an Acropolis in practically every Greek town, but this is the most famous one. You know, you have the Acrocorinth, for instance, the highest spot in Athens, or in Corinth rather, and you have other cities that have acropoli, if you would say. So the Acropolis was just the high spot in town, and then they would build the temples on top of the highest spot because it's closer to the gods, right? And so you have the Parthenon there that's built on top of that. The reason why it's called the Parthenon is because of the goddess Athena Parthenos, the virgin goddess Athena. So Parthenos means a virgin in Greek. And so that's why it's called the Parthenon. And if you're like an architect or something, you know about the Parthenon because it's awesome. I'm not going to lie to you. As far as buildings go, it is absolutely, positively amazing. Go look up it on a video on YouTube about the architecture of it. It's phenomenal from a structural standpoint and stuff. It's just unimaginable how good this building was built. Like the dimensions and everything. It's just astounding. Inside it was this 37-foot tall, if you can imagine that, 37-foot tall image of the goddess Athena. I don't know how tall 37 foot is, but that's pretty tall. Has anybody, out of curiosity, everybody gone to Nashville and gone to see? How was it? Did y'all go to the Parthenon?
I've been inside.
You've been inside it?
I was like in 5th grade.
Okay. Okay, 5th grade couldn't care less. I get you. You're probably not alone, right?
School trip.
Yes.
Has some statues in there,
So
like the missing heads and all the regular things that you would see. They're in there.
I've got to go there sometime. I think it would be really interesting. I would like to go experience, because that way you get a full feel of what it would have been like for someone walking in there. So anyway, so if you want to see a reproduction of it, there's one in Nashville. So if you're ever going through Tennessee, it's a very large building. Yes, it's astounding. And again, speaking of very large building, if you remember, we talked about the temple to Artemis back in Ephesus. You could fit 3 Parthenons inside that one temple to Artemis, to give you an idea of the size. It's astounding. Anyway, back to our temple here. Let's bring it to us for a few minutes. We talked a lot. We've got down the last 5 minutes. We're not even talking to us yet. As we think about idolatry, we don't walk around town and go, man, there's an idol there, there's a temple there, there's this there, there's this that. So, first off, what are idols now? Do we have idols? Does that even exist anymore? Is that just a first century thing? And secondly, what is our attitude, if we do see idols, what is our attitude towards them? Are we as disturbed as Paul was? So what are some ways that we start thinking about idols? What would be an idol? Yeah, all right.
Well, I'm sitting on one in my wallet.
Okay.
Money. Mm-hmm. Whether we want to admit it or not, it's an idol to one degree or another, sometimes to a large degree. Mm-hmm. So there's our idol.
A lot of times, that's right. What else? Okay, yes, telephones, right? It's technology.
Telephones and technology.
Yes. What other idols? Yep. I didn't catch that. Say it again. Sports complexes. Now you're stepping on toes.
To me, it's a person that does good work for the community or for the country.
Okay, interesting. So, as someone, like looking at this person as an idol?
what color our skin is, to me, that's kind of odd.
Interesting. Okay. Yep. Okay, power also. All these ideas and concepts, like we said earlier, it's interesting in Athens that they had all these deities that were essentially values. Isn't that interesting?
I definitely would say I do not have an idol that's in entertainment or sports. And yet, if I were to meet face to face with Taylor Swift or, any one of our Texans that I really admire, I would be in awe. And so
Interesting.
that makes me kind of question.
Okay, good question. So when we bump into the folks that are famous in some shape, form, or fashion, we do treat them interesting. That's an interesting observation, yeah. We even have a show, right? TV show, American, right? We openly recognize it.
There's a lot of people that are idols,
Influencers? Yes.
I lived in India. When I was 8, my parents moved to India, and Paul would have gone crazy because everything is an idol. They have 1,000 gods. They have temples to everything, and they have idols. Everything is an idol. And the funny thing was in Saudi Arabia, they had a different take on that because they saw the Hindus as idol worshipers, and they did not like them.
Yeah, that's an interesting comparison. That's two very different worlds.
Yep.
As we think about idols for us, I do think y'all are hitting on some things. We all obviously need to have, for example, money to some degree or another. I think pragmatically, I got to pay my bills. I got to pay my mortgage, right? And eat lunch and so forth. So we need certain amounts of this currency or whatever it may be. What's the difference between me having money and it becoming an idol? I think that's where we have to wrestle, isn't it? That's where we have to evaluate what's in our hearts. I was talking with my wife Alicia last night. We were chewing on this together and thinking through this. How do we see whatever this may be, whether it's money or sports or whatever it may be, how do we know when it becomes an idol?
when you use it to define who you are.
Okay, maybe when you use it to define who you are. Okay, that's impossible. What else?
When you put it before anything else.
Okay, when you put it before anything else. Okay?
Yeah, some people would say golf is that.
Okay, some people will say golf is that. That's true.
The lives.
Yeah. Yes.
When I start sacrificing godly values for something.
Okay, when I start sacrificing godly values for something, that's a good observation, I think. It's really easy for things to slide, isn't it? And I think that we have things, there's kind of a spectrum, and we could talk about this for a long time. But I believe at the heart of it is some of the things y'all are hitting on. How much, and for me, a lot of times, I simplify things. I'm a pretty simple thinking guy. First off, how much time do I spend on something? How much energy thinking about this do I spend on it? And how much money do I spend towards it? That often shows what truly is important to me.
And what are you willing to give up
And
for?
yes, and what am I willing to get up for? And come back to what kind of sacrifices for my spiritual life am I willing to give up for that? I think those are good things to consider. Everybody needs to look at yourself. I think one of our major idols right now is what Ginger mentioned of technology, just relaxing. We like it. We just could chill out, watch Netflix all day or whatever it may be. Others, it's going to be other aspects of sports or things like that. What matters most to me? And we've got to be evaluating. And I think we need to take Paul's example here and go, you know what? These are idols. These are taking me away from God. In the book of Colossians in chapter 3, verse 5, Paul says that this word greed directly is an idol. It says greed is idolatry, period. So in some sense, the way in which we view our money also has the same effect on us. All right, guys, they've opened the doors. We've got to stop. Yeah. Thank y'all so much. We're going to continue on in Athens down the road, so we'll keep on here next time and go from there. Hope y'all have a fabulous week. God bless. Take care.